As I entered the bathroom, a sparkle on the rug caught my eye. The sunlight was reflecting off something, so I looked down to check. Being barefoot, I wanted to avoid stepping on anything sharp. Vanessa hadn't mentioned dropping anything, but it was possible. I soon spotted it, a tiny circle of foil that had fallen on the floor. It was the backing from a pill strip, typically left attached but sometimes detached and dropped. One side was blank, but the other had a marking. Since it was Wednesday, it indicated Tuesday's pill. I knew neither Vanessa nor I were on any medication. We'd both had recent medical checkups and were deemed healthy, so why was there a pill cover in our bathroom? At first, it was hard to spot because, without the light on, it blended almost perfectly with the carpet. Eventually, I found it. A tiny piece of foil had fallen to the floor, catching the light and drawing my attention as I entered the bathroom. I picked it up, and it turned out to be the backing from a pill strip. The small piece of foil that usually stays attached when you push out a pill sometimes, as in this case, detaches and ends up on the floor. I inspected it closely. One side was blank, but the other had a marking that read 2. Since today was Wednesday, I assumed it referred to Tuesday's pill. This indicated that the pills were meant to be taken daily. I wasn't on any medication myself, being 35 and in great shape, and neither was Vanessa. We had both recently had our annual checkups and were declared healthy, so why was there a pill wrapper in my bathroom? I knew some pills need to be taken daily, with birth control being the first that came to mind. However, Vanessa wasn't using birth control, or so I thought, since I had a vasectomy 2 years ago. She also didn't suffer from menstrual cramps, so why were there pills? I briefly wondered if she was hiding a medical condition, but both our recent checkups showed we were healthy. The foil piece suggested there were more pills, so I locked the door and began searching, as Vanessa was still in bed. I eventually found them hidden at the bottom of a tampon box, inside an aspirin container. The pills were the same she used to take before my vasectomy, and before we decided not to have more children. If Vanessa was using the pill again, it could mean she was involved with someone who could potentially get her pregnant, leading me to suspect she was cheating. Vanessa and I had been together for 9 years. We met after university when she was a PA, and after a year of dating, we married when I was 26. We had 2 kids, James and Sonia, and I thought I had the perfect family. After Vanessa returned to work post-maternity leave, we had where for the kids. Vanessa's salary was almost equal to the Orr's, but she loved her job and didn't mind. I co-own an engineering firm, and while we weren't wealthy, we were comfortable. I cleaned up the bathroom, replaced the pills, and decided I needed to think carefully. Confronting Vanessa immediately wouldn't help. I needed a plan and solid evidence. I needed to understand the situation better before taking any action. At work, I contemplated finding out who Vanessa was seeing when it started and how long it's been going on. I also considered whether the kids were actually mine. I wanted to confirm my suspicions before acting on my feelings of betrayal and anger. I began by ordering DNA testing kits for the kids, in surveillance gear including voice recorders and tiny cameras. I also planned to clone Vanessa's phone to access her messages, emails, and calls. I needed a new phone for this purpose. It took a few days for everything to arrive. During that period, I kept a close watch. Vanessa's behavior seemed normal. Our bed life was average, occurring once or twice a week, usually on weekends when we stayed in bed late. I didn't notice any suspicious odors on her, nor did she rush to the shower as soon as she got home. Everything seemed unchanged. Either she wasn't cheating, or she was incredibly cautious, or the affair had become such a routine that it felt natural. On Friday morning, the packages arrived. I had them delivered to my office to avoid any questions. The shipment included DNA kits, voice recorders, cameras, and a phone cloning kit. Everything was set. That afternoon, I left the office early. When I got home, the au pair was feeding the kids dinner and preparing them for bed. I let her handle that while I set up the cameras, one in the bathroom, one in the living room, and one in the bedroom with a clear view of the bed. I heard the children playing in the bath and went to help get them ready for bed. I took care of Sonia while the au pair stayed with James. I swabbed Sonia's cheek and put the swab in my pocket, then read to her until she fell asleep. When I checked on James, he was still awake with the au pair reading to him. I offered to take over so she could go home, and she gratefully agreed. Swabbing James was quick, and he was asleep within 20 minutes. I packed up the swabs, including one for my own cheek, and dropped them in the mailbox. The postman would collect them in the morning. The service guaranteed that results would be available online within 48 business hours, which meant by Wednesday at the latest. Vanessa arrived home right on schedule, and we followed our usual routine. She shared details about her day, and I talked about mine, but neither of us paid much attention to the other. After dinner, she took a shower. During her shower, I used the chance to place the recorders in her car and bag and to clone her cell phone. I checked the cloned phone for any suspicious texts or emails but found nothing. Either she was being incredibly cautious or she wasn't cheating. I couldn't decide. The weekend went by as it typically did. We had closeness both mornings before the kids got up. It had become a sort of routine, almost like a chore. If we managed to complete it before either child woke up, we considered it a success. Our success rate was about 50%, with her usually finishing first. No calls or texts came through over the weekend, and since we were together all the time, I couldn't check if she was taking the tablets. However, I did notice that the relevant days were missing from the pill strip. Since I wasn't taking them and only Vanessa and I were home, it seemed clear that she was. On Monday, I informed her that I would be working from home. She left for the office, giving me the chance to remove the flash drives from the cameras and review the footage. The bathroom camera confirmed that she was indeed taking the pills, but the bedroom camera revealed something unexpected. On Saturday evening, while I was cooking dinner, she had taken a shower in the bedroom. The footage showed her using a phone to send texts. Since there were no suspicious messages on the cloned phone, she must have a second phone. It wasn't in her bag, so where could it be? I observed what Vanessa did with the phone after she finished texting. She went to the air conditioning, unlocked it, and hid the phone inside. I immediately checked the duct but found it empty. She must hide the phone there while she's home, but takes it with her when she leaves. I needed to access that phone. This was the first solid evidence that something was going on, though I still didn't know exactly what. The signs pointed to cheating, but it wasn't certain. I reviewed the footage of her getting dressed that morning and saw her retrieve the phone from the air conditioning unit and put it in her bag before heading out. I had to get that phone when she came home that night. I watched her closely. She tossed her bag carelessly in the hallway and went about her usual evening routine. After dinner, she took a shower, and I checked her bag. The phone wasn't there. She must have taken it with her and hidden it in the air conditioning unit again. What she didn't realize or didn't care about was that the other side of the vent led into Sonia's room. Quietly, I listened for the sound of the shower and sneaked into Sonia's room. I opened the vent from her side and found the phone inside. I took it to my office and cloned it onto the new phone in just a few minutes. After returning the phone to the vent and almost closing it, I heard Vanessa coming out of the shower. I sat by Sonia's bed and stroked her hair, just as Vanessa entered. "Is something wrong?" she asked softly. I shook my head. "I like to spend time with them from time to time," I whispered. "It reminds me of how lucky I am to have two such wonderful kids." She smiled. "You're such a softie," she said. "Let's go before you wake her." The next day was the first time I could review the cloned phone. That's when everything fell apart. As I sat in my office, tears streaming down my face while staring at the cloned phone, I didn't notice the intercom from my secretary. Eventually, she gave up on reaching me that way and knocked before entering. Michelle, my secretary, was a no-nonsense woman in her 30s or 40s with a slim build, red hair, and green eyes. She always dressed conservatively, far older than her years. Our interactions had always been strictly professional. I'd seen firsthand what happened when someone crossed boundaries with her. I once had to deal with a business partner who couldn't handle her rejection. Michelle made it clear she would leave and sue for harassment if he didn't stop. Her ultimatum led to his departure and me gaining a larger share of the company. When Michelle saw me upset, she stepped back briefly, then returned to my office. She locked the door, pulled up a chair, and handed me some tissues from her ever-present supply. I took them and began wiping my tears. "Tell me," was all she said. I showed her the phone. The phone contained text messages between Vanessa and an unnamed person. These messages revealed a series of secret meetings and an ongoing relationship. The other party knew intimate details about Vanessa that only a long-term partner would know. Things like a mole on the inside of her thigh and the distinctive sound she made during intimacy. I was never mentioned in the texts. It was as if I didn't exist. There was no reference to my presence or any mention of me at all. Michelle asked if I knew who it was, but I didn't. She then asked how I found out, so I explained about finding the silver tab and the pills. As I talked, I noticed she was holding my hand for the first time. Michelle mentioned needing more details and said the DNA results for the children would be ready by Wednesday. She asked if I could hold it together until then, and I wasn't sure she understood. She told me the Portland office needed me urgently. She had booked me on the next flight and arranged for my return on Thursday. When I said I couldn't focus on that, she instructed me to tell Vanessa I was dealing with an issue in Portland and would be back on Thursday. Michelle sent a text to Vanessa, who replied quickly, asking me to let her know when I arrived. Michelle glanced at my phone with a smirk, then called someone named Lorraine, arranging to meet her later. She then told me to go clean myself up. Her tone, and the fact that I was almost conditioned to follow her orders in the office, meant I complied immediately. It was actually a relief not to have to make decisions myself, and to leave everything to someone else. When I emerged from the bathroom, Ed was holding my jacket. "Where are we going?" I asked. "You have a meeting with an old friend of mine," she replied. I went along with it. It turned out Lorraine was Michelle's best friend, and also a divorce lawyer. She had handled Michelle's divorce when her husband had been unfaithful with a coworker. Michelle explained the situation to Lorraine while I watched. In the days it felt surreal. Lorraine, clearly experienced with such cases, turned her focus on me once she had enough information. "Gary," she said. I thought she was addressing someone else until I felt a sharp sting on my cheek. Michelle had slapped me. This jolted me back to reality. Lorraine's expression of shock and amusement quickly vanished as she looked at me seriously. "Gary," she asked. I nodded. "Do you have any idea what you want to do about this?" My engineer mindset kicked in. I focused on planning. "In them both," I said. I expected Michelle to react with shock, but surprisingly, she actually smiled. "All right," Lorraine said. "I understand your frustration, but unfortunately, that's not an option. It's illegal. However, we do have legal alternatives. Let's go over those before we start." She continued, "I'm just outlining your options. I'm not endorsing any just yet. That might come later. Your first option is to do nothing. From what I gather, you had a good life before all this, and it doesn't have to change. You can continue as if you're unaware. Your second option is an amicable divorce. You'd file for irreconcilable differences and divide your assets, the company, the house, and the 401k. Since she earns less, you'd likely need to provide support for her for several years and for the children until they finish high school. Your third option is to go all out. File for adultery. If the children aren't yours, you could also file for false completion of the birth certificate. You could sue the other person for alienation of affection if they're the father or if they're a coworker. Sue for not following the company's fraternization policy, which most companies have these days. If the other person is married, you could give their spouse all the details of the affair. If they were aware, we might have a case against them as well. If they weren't, maybe I can help them with their own divorce. You could go public, inform everyone, friends, family, colleagues. If she's part of any groups or church organizations, tell them too. Go as hard as you can to protect your assets. You'd need to sell your share of the company to an offshore trust, remortgage the house to extract all possible equity, and cash out your 401k. Use the funds for a big splurge in Vegas. My mind was racing. I immediately understood her point. Option 1 wasn't feasible. I wasn't about to be anyone's fool, especially after being unknowingly one for so long. Option 2 wasn't acceptable either. I'd invested too much in building the business and our lifestyle. There was no way I was going to give her half of everything I had and continue to support her while she was with someone else. Option 3? I said, "Let's go nuclear." Lorraine smiled. "All right, I'll start preparing the necessary paperwork. I recommend we begin some discreet surveillance on your wife to gather more details about who she's seeing, when, and where. We need more evidence. Can I keep that phone? It's more useful to me than to you." I nodded and handed her the phone. Michelle and I left Lorraine's office, and she took me to a small, family-owned hotel where she checked me in, told me to go take a shower, and order some room service. She instructed. She was clearly in charge. I'll be back later with some things for you. I moved through the motions. My whole world was crumbling, yet here I was in a hotel room, ordering room service like I was on vacation. It was the only way I could handle the overwhelming stress. 9 years of my life felt wasted. What hurt the most was that I had been completely unaware of everything. How had I missed what was happening? Who was she seeing? Was it the boss she had returned to after each child? She had said she loved her work and the freedom. But was that the truth? Or was it just that she couldn't stay away from her lover for long? I eyed the minibar, tempted to drown my sorrows when Michelle walked in. Don't even think about it, she said. You need to stay focused, not numb yourself. You have to make a plan, and you can't do that if you're drinking. Plan? I said, feeling defeated. I had a plan, and it was a good one. I had a loving wife and 2 beautiful kids. And now look where I am. I have a cheating wife and no idea if the kids are even mine. I feel like the biggest fool in the world. Everything in my life is falling apart, and you want me to plan? She studied me for a few moments. I expected her to offer some sympathy or even a hug, but instead, she checked her watch. All right, she said firmly. The pity party is over. How many times did you face obstacles while we were building the company? How many times did things not go as planned? What does that have to do with how many times she pressed, I don't know? I admitted, a lot. There was the time the patent office lost our application for the inverse thread, and we got outbid by heading low. There was also the time the bank tried to foreclose on us early, due to pressure. And there was, she interrupted. When did you ever just sit down and give up during those times? That was different, I said. How was it different? She asked. What made those situations so unique? I had something to fight for back then, I explained. I had a family relying on me. Still have a family, she said, and they are just as dependent on you. But it's not just them. There are 141 employees and their families counting on you to get through this. None of your partners can keep the company going. They're all engineers, but you're the only one with a business sense. If you fail, the company fails. Do you think she cares about the families relying on your company? If she gets half, she'll sell it off to the highest bidder, and you'll lose control. Heading Lou will end up owning everything you've built. Is that what you want? I looked at her, realizing she was right. I had invested too much time and effort to let everything slip away to whoever offers the most to my unfaithful wife. I needed to get things organized to ensure the future for myself and my remaining family. If the kids turned out to be mine, I would make sure they're well taken care of. As for Vanessa, she had made her choices and could live with the consequences. I would mourn the loss of that relationship once everything else was settled. My fog of confusion lifted, and with renewed anger and determination, I sat down with Michelle to make plans. My goal was to secure the company's future and protect the only family I had left. As soon as I made that decision, everything became clear. The pain and uncertainty vanished. Michelle noticed the change in me and nodded with approval. That's the Gary I need now, she said. The one who knows how to plan ahead. We spent the evening planning to secure the company's future. I initially considered selling my shares to my partners, but Michelle advised against it. She thought they would mishandle the company if they became majority shareholders, so I needed to keep control. We decided to set up an offshore trust, where I would sell the company at market value. I would remain the CEO with a minimal salary, and the trust records would be out of the court's reach, keeping the owners' identities hidden. While this would make me a millionaire on paper, I needed to liquidate all that capital. This meant cashing out my 401k and extracting the equity from the house, which was solely in my name since Vanessa wasn't working when we bought it. I made a list of tasks and texted my lawyer to arrange an appointment for the next day. After Michelle left, I showered and went to bed, despite expecting a restless night. I fell asleep quickly, though, and woke up to my phone alarm. I found a message from Vanessa on my phone. You didn't let me know you arrived. Is everything okay? Sorry, was working late and then fell asleep. Things are coming together now. I should be back by Thursday. Good to see you then. Love you. I couldn't bring myself to reply. I just couldn't muster the energy to type those words. Michelle knocked on my door shortly after 8. I had taken another shower and was considering going out for breakfast. Breakfast, she said. signaling for me to follow her. We went to a diner nearby and sat in a booth, enjoying pancakes and bacon with maple syrup. Part of me was puzzled by my calm demeanor. It was as if my world hadn't just collapsed and my heart wasn't broken. I reasoned that eventually, the full impact would hit me once things settled. I wasn't looking forward to that, but for now, I had tasks to focus on. Brian Spencer, Michelle said, named my lawyer. He called and said he can see us at 10. We should go to your bank first to cash out your 401k and unlock the equity in your house before heading there. I understand why consolidating my funds makes sense, I said, but won't the court just order me to pay her half if there's a record of me having all that money? Only if you still have it, Michelle said with a smirk. That's where Vegas comes into play. Once you've withdrawn all that equity, spend a week in Vegas and blow it all. Do this before you file for divorce. When the court assesses your finances, you'll appear broke, actually in debt. The bank might foreclose on your house, and your salary will barely cover your living expenses. That's assuming the kids aren't yours. If they are, you can put the entire 401k into a trust for their college funds. Vanessa won't be able to access it. She could end up earning more than you, and might even end up paying you alimony. When will you get the DNA results? I asked. The company said the results should be available online sometime today, I replied, picking up my phone. I checked the email from the company, found the link, and clicked on it. The page began to load, but I set my phone down. I wasn't sure I was ready to see the results just yet. May I? Michelle asked, and I handed the phone to her. She picked it up and scrolled through the screen a couple of times. I watched her face, trying to gauge her reaction. She looked up from the phone. The results aren't ready yet, she said. The tracking indicates they should be in within the next 12 hours. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Let it go, she said, standing up. The bank should be open now. Releasing the equity from the house and cashing out my 401k was surprisingly quick. I closed all our savings accounts, including the kids' college funds, and moved the money into an account I opened solely in my name. The only account I left untouched was the joint one we used for everyday expenses, which had less than $10,000 in it anyway. My lawyer, while not exactly derailing our plans, certainly added a significant twist, but he did it in a helpful way. You're overlooking one detail, he pointed out when we discussed our strategy. You have a prenuptial agreement. I do. I responded, taking act. I wasn't aware of this. It was a requirement of the partnership agreement when you first started, he explained. All partners had to have a prenup to safeguard the company in case of any relationship issues. It only protects the company, so she can't claim any company assets for divorce purposes. You're considered an employee, so she can only claim against your salary and 401k. What I recommend, he continued, and I hope I'm not disrespecting your divorce attorney's plan, is to invest all the funds from the house and your 401k back into the company. Consider buying out one of your partners. I know Robert has been hinting at wanting to sell his share. You don't have enough to buy him out entirely, but you could take a loan from the company pension fund to cover the difference. The loan repayments will come from your salary, which will lower your income for asset assessment purposes. Since everything else will be tied up in the company and thus protected, she won't be able to touch it. Your credit rating might suffer when the bank forecloses on your house, and you'll lose half of whatever remains in your bank account, but you'll receive nothing else. We can also adjust your salary to be lower than hers, which might even result in her having to pay you alimony. What will I have to live on? I asked. If all my salary goes towards loan payments, I'll still need to cover living expenses and food, plus I have 2 kids to take care of. He interrupted. Let's hold off on making any decisions about the kids until we have more clarity. If they turn out not to be yours, have you thought about how you'll stay involved in their lives? I don't know, I replied. It's too painful to even think about right now. I need to be certain before I can make any decisions about that. He added, don't overlook the other aspects of your attorney's plan. I'm confident you'll secure a settlement from her company that will cover the loan and restore your full salary once everything is resolved. Plus, if it turns out the children aren't yours, you might be able to reclaim expenses from their biological father. Since this would be settled after the divorce, it won't impact your divorce settlement. Can you reach out to Robert and see if he's interested in selling his share? I asked. I'm not sure I can handle that myself right now, he agreed. I'll contact him and let you know what he says. We shook hands, and as we left his office, I felt a sense of relief. Things were starting to fall into place, which was reassuring. But then, I remembered the reason behind these plans, and the relief was replaced by a deep, hollow ache in my chest. As we were having lunch at the diner, I hesitated to check my phone again. I couldn't bring myself to do more than click the link in the email and hand the phone to Michelle. I watched her closely, hoping her reaction would reveal whether I was a father or not. "I'm so sorry, Gary," she said softly. It was the most compassionate I had ever seen her. She handed me the phone, and I read the results for myself. Neither child was biologically mine, though they did have the same father. It just wasn't me. The shock of losing both children was eclipsed by the fury I felt over the betrayal. Not only had she misled me about the children, but she had also convinced me to get a vasectomy, leaving me unable to have biological children of my own. "Gary," Michelle's sharp voice snapped me back to reality. "This isn't the time or place for this. Keep it together. We'll get through this, I promise." I took several deep breaths to calm my anger. I had been so enraged that I even considered hiring someone to end the man who fathered the children I thought were mine. Michelle took charge again and guided me out of the diner. "Lorraine called. She informed me she wants to see you." We headed to Lorraine's office. When we arrived, Lorraine's expression was grim. "I have a preliminary report from the private investigator," she said. "It seems Vanessa didn't waste any time. A man stayed over at your house last night, but we couldn't see inside." "I have cameras set up in the house," I replied. "I can go change out the flash drives and check what happened." "Okay," Lorraine said. "Do that now, and then we can make a plan. The information on those drives will likely be crucial." "The Oprah is there," I added. "I can't go back. I'm supposed to be away on business." Lorraine checked her phone. "The Oprah is at a play center with Sophie and James," she said. "I'll keep an eye on her and let you know if she leaves." My house was about a 30-minute drive from Lorraine's office, and Michelle drove quickly. We arrived without any issues, and I swapped out the flash drives. I took a brief look around the house but didn't notice anything unusual. We then went back to Lorraine's office and reviewed the flash drives. I decided not to view the footage from the bedroom. I didn't want to see what had happened there. I immediately recognized the man as soon as he entered the house. As I suspected, it was her boss, Bill Wright, the man she had been working for throughout our relationship. What nearly broke me was seeing how he arrived at the house. He had his own key and let himself in when he arrived. James saw him and exclaimed, "Daddy Bill," before running to hug him. That was the breaking point for me. I collapsed in tears, unable to watch anymore. Lorraine observed as I fell apart, and Michelle, for the first time, comforted me, holding me while I cried. It took a while, but eventually, I composed myself. "Do you need some time?" Lorraine asked, but I shook my head. The pain had lessened somewhat, and anger was beginning to take its place. "What's the next step?" I asked. "I already have a copy of the employment terms and conditions from your wife's company," Lorraine replied. "There's a non-fraternization policy, so you have a case against the company for not enforcing it. Since the person your wife is involved with is a senior executive, the company can't claim ignorance." We then shared my company's lawyer's advice with Lorraine, and she broke into a wide grin. She called him and requested copies of the prenup, which he promptly sent over. "This is perfect," Lorraine said as she reviewed the prenup. "Forget everything I said before. Your lawyer's plan is spot on. If your partner wants to sell, buy him out. Invest all your available funds into the company. That will protect it from her. We can pursue claims against her company for not enforcing the policy against him, for alienation of affection against her, and both of them for expenses related to the children. The deductible on the birth medical bills alone is significant. It all hinges on whether Robert is willing to sell," I said. "We'll have to wait for his response." Michelle dropped me back at the hotel, and I headed up to my room. Just as I was about to sit on the bed, there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find her waiting in the hallway. "Come on," she said. "You can't stay here." "Why not?" I asked. "Because you shouldn't be alone," she explained. "You'll either brood or hit the minibar. I want to keep an eye on you." While she spoke, she had already packed up my few belongings. She took my arm, led me out of the room, checked me out, and drove me to her car. "Where are we going?" I asked, though I didn't really care. "To my place," she said. "I have a spare room you can use." But before I could respond, she gave me a look that made me stop. I had never been to Michelle's house before, and was surprised to see that it was almost as large as mine. Whereas my home had 2 levels, hers was a single floor. She showed me to a room with its own bathroom. "Shower and change," she instructed. "Dinner will be ready in 30 minutes. We ate dinner in silence. The food was probably good, but I barely tasted it. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts that wouldn't calm down. I was furious, but too drained to show it. I was heartbroken, but couldn't muster the energy to care. All I could focus on was executing my plans. I was on autopilot with my course set, as I was contemplating what to do next. My phone rang. I flinched, hoping it wasn't Vanessa. It wasn't. "Hi, Robert," I answered, my voice flat. "Why?" was all he said. Robert and I had been friends since university. We had trained together, and it was a project we worked on that laid the groundwork for our business. Initially, I had a larger share of the company because I could invest more capital than he could. "Vanessa is cheating on me," I said flatly. "She's been unfaithful the entire time, all along." He asked, "Ast? You mean neither of the kids is mine?" I told him there was a pause of silence on the other end of the line. "So, you plan to invest all your assets into the company and rely on the prenup for protection?" he inquired. Either Brian Spencer, our lawyer, had thoroughly explained this, or Robert had a much better grasp of the partnership agreement than I did. "I want to retain 5%, he said, "and stay listed as a consulting engineer. I'll handle the details with HR. The rest is yours." "All right," I responded. "I'll have Brian prepare the necessary paperwork." "Gary," he said after a pause, "I'm truly sorry. I know it's hard now, but it does get better. I've been through something similar, and it does improve." It was then that I recalled Robert's divorce about 4 years ago. I didn't know much about it since he was a very private person, but I knew it hadn't been easy. That's why he was aware of the prenup's significance. He had used it himself. The next morning, Michelle brought me a cup of coffee to wake me up. "Come on," she said. "We have a lot left to do." Our first stop was Brian Spencer, the lawyer. He had already prepared all the documents for my buyout of Robert, and we completed the transaction in less than 30 minutes. I handed over everything I had withdrawn from the house, my savings and my 401k. I also had to secure a loan from the company pension plan to cover the remainder. On paper, I was now roughly $1 million in debt. My salary had been cut by about half, as the loan payments were deducted before taxes. Afterward, we went to see Lorraine. I presented her with all the documents from the business transaction, and she was thrilled. "This is excellent," she said. "I'll file the paperwork today. We should be able to serve them all by Monday. If you'd like, we can serve him, her, and the company at the same time. Where would you like her served?" "Anywhere that will cause her the most humiliation," I replied. "If you could do it with a billboard during the Super Bowl, I'd gladly pay for that." Lorraine chuckled. "We'll serve her at her office," she said, "at 10 a.m. on Monday, provided the papers clear the courts by then. If I file them today, I should have them back by tomorrow afternoon." I nodded. "What's next?" I glanced at Michelle, who was managing things. "Next," she said, "we have 2 more stops before you head back to the office and act like you just returned from a crisis in Portland. Do you think you'll be able to hold it together at home until Monday?" "I guess I'll have to," I replied. "Don't just guess," she said. "Tell me what you need to stay composed until then." "I'm not sure," I said. "Maybe some good news." She gave me a reassuring smile. "Then let's go," she said. I was surprised when we arrived at the medical center where I had all my physicals, and where I had undergone the procedure that made it impossible for me to become a father. "What are we doing here?" I asked. "You wanted some good news," she said. "Come on." I followed her into the clinic and waited as she approached the reception desk. The receptionist nodded and directed us to have a seat. We sat down, and less than 2 minutes later, my doctor emerged and invited me into his office. I glanced at Michelle, who had stayed where she was. "Please come with me," I asked, and she nodded, following me inside. Dr. Harrington made no mention of Michelle being present during my consultation. He was familiar with her, as she was both my and Vanessa's doctor, so he knew she wasn't my wife. Why I had chosen to bring her along was none of his concern. "Gary," he began, "I understand you're interested in discussing the possibility of reversing your vasectomy." My eyes widened in surprise. Was that even an option? I looked at Michelle, who had a faint smile on her face. "Yes, is it possible?" I asked. "Certainly," Dr. Harrington replied. "Since your vasectomy was performed less than 3 years ago, there's about a 95% success rate for reversal. The procedure takes longer than the original surgery and requires general anesthesia, but I'm confident you'll be able to father children again after the operation." Tears filled my eyes once more. I still had a chance at fatherhood, though it meant undergoing surgery. It was a small price to pay for the opportunity to have my own children. I didn't know who I would have children with, but at least it was possible. "I understand it's a lot to process," Dr. Harrington said. "Here's some information about the surgery and its costs. Unfortunately, it won't be covered by your insurance. If you decide to proceed, let me know, and we can arrange for a preliminary evaluation." "Thank you, doctor," Michelle said as she took the information from him. "We'll be in touch." I stood up as well, allowing Michelle to guide me out of the clinic and back to her car. "Is this good news?" she asked, with a gentle smile. On impulse, I hugged her tightly, burying my face in her hair. "Thank you," I said. Then I realized what I had done and quickly stepped back. "I'm so sorry," I stammered. Gary," she said softly, "it's okay." We both got into her car. "One more stop, then it's back to the office," Michelle said. I had visited Bill Way's house several times during Vanessa's employment with him. He and his wife, Stephanie, lived in a well-to-do neighborhood just outside the city, within a gated community. They had hosted some company events there. "Why are we going there?" I asked. Michelle stepped out of the car and headed towards the front door. I followed her. She didn't need to knock. Stephanie had already been notified by the security guard, who led us into the community and was waiting for us at the door. "Gary, Stephanie," she greeted us. "You must be Michelle, his secretary. Were you the one who called?" "Yes, that was me," Michelle replied. "Please come in," Stephanie invited, leading us to a room that resembled an office just off the foyer. I had never been in this room before. From the photos on the desk and the wall, it was clearly Bill's office, but Stephanie took a seat behind the desk and motioned for us to sit across from her, as though this was a formal discussion. "How can I assist you?" Stephanie asked, directing her gaze at me. I sat there, unable to speak, simply staring at her. "Do you know?" I finally asked. Stephanie sighed deeply. "No," I suspected, but I didn't have any concrete evidence. If I had, I would have gone after him for everything he had. "Has joined the club," Michelle muttered. "Do you have evidence?" Stephanie asked, and I nodded in response. I had proof that neither of the kids were mine, that they shared a different father. I also had video footage of him and Vanessa at my house, and of my son calling him Dad. I couldn't finish the sentence as my throat tightened, and once again, I was overwhelmed. "Oh, Gary, I'm so sorry," Stephanie said. "I had my suspicions about Bill and Vanessa for years, but he was always so cautious. I had him followed, checked his phone and emails, and even confronted him, but he managed to convince me I was just being paranoid. The private investigator I hired didn't find anything. I assure you, if I had been certain or had any solid evidence, I would have come to you immediately. But I couldn't shatter what seemed like a happy marriage based solely on suspicion. I needed concrete proof, and I never managed to gather any." "What are you planning to do?" she asked. I hesitated, unsure if I should reveal my plans to the wife of my adversary. I worried she might relay everything to him as soon as he returned home, although it was likely too late for him to make a significant move. I wanted the revelation to hit him as hard as it did me. "The real question is, what will you do now that you have proof?" I asked. She gave a small smile in response. "I understand," she said, "and I don't blame you for being cautious. I wouldn't share my plans either. If you could recommend a good divorce lawyer, I would be grateful." Michelle handed her a card from her purse. "Thank you," Stephanie said. "Will next week be enough time for you?" I nodded in agreement. "Perfect," Stephanie replied. I'll contact her, she held up the card, and coordinate with her. Stephanie then stood up, signaling that our meeting was over. Michelle and I both stood as well. Stephanie came over and gave me a brief hug, giving me a kiss on the cheek. Once again, I'm so sorry, she said. Take care of him, she said to Michelle, who tensed slightly at the hug. He deserves better than what that woman did to him. Back at the office, I spent the rest of the day catching up on tasks I had neglected while in Portland. When the day was over, I went home. Michelle, as usual, knocked on my door, peeked in, and informed me she was leaving for the evening. She had reverted to her usual professional demeanor, this change making me feel a pang of loss. I'd thought we were growing closer, but perhaps that was just my imagination. I said goodnight to Michelle and thanked her for all her assistance. I stayed late at the office, trying to catch up on the work I had missed. What time will you be home? Vanessa's text came in around 8, probably another hour or two. I need to catch up on things after my trip. I replied, I'll likely be asleep by then since I have an early start tomorrow. Love you XX. I couldn't bring myself to respond to that message. I continued working until nearly 11, hoping Vanessa would be asleep when I got home. The less interaction I had with her, the better I would feel. When I arrived home, the house was dark and everything seemed normal. I checked on Sonia and James. They were both asleep, looking as charming as ever. A wave of emotion hit me, and I had to retreat to the bathroom to cry. I didn't want Vanessa to see me upset over children who weren't even mine. I still hadn't made up my mind about what to do regarding them. It seemed unlikely that either child would remember me if I chose to leave, although I had no obligation to them. I cared deeply for both. How could I walk away from them when, just 48 hours ago, they were my children, my own flesh and blood, and my greatest pride? Now they were just another reminder of my wife's betrayal. I decided to wait and see how things unfolded. The decision might be made for me. I went to bed, trying hard not to wake Vanessa. Falling asleep took forever. When my alarm went off the next morning, Vanessa was already gone. The nanny was in the kitchen, feeding the children when I came in. I looked at her, wondering if she knew what had happened. There's no way she didn't know. Was she now watching me, laughing at the fool who couldn't even keep his wife happy? Did she realize the children weren't even mine? Did she take them to say goodnight to Daddy Bill, just like she used to do with me? My thoughts spiraled, imagining her and Vanessa in a compromising situation with Bill, while the children cried in the next room. I shook my head in frustration. She knew, I thought, and come Monday, I was going to take immense satisfaction in firing her. I'd make sure she never worked as a nanny again. I'd inform the agency. Hold on, what was I doing? I was directing my anger at someone who had little control over the situation. Damned if she did, damned if she didn't. If she had told me, she'd have lost her job. She could have left. I mused, but she seemed to care about the kids, whom she had looked after since before Sonia was born. I was venting, but probably at the wrong person. I went to work. Michelle was already at the office when I arrived. It was as if the last few days hadn't happened. She was all business, though I noticed from my schedule that she had blocked out the day for something labeled marketing. I settled into my office, and she brought in my morning coffee, just as she had every day for the past 9 years. She also brought herself a coffee, which was unusual. Marketing, I asked. When did I start doing marketing? She grinned, and it was a bit devilish, which oddly made me feel better inside. We need to plan, she said, the final part of Lorraine's strategy. I looked at her, confused. What? I asked. Informing everyone, Michelle replied. Her friends, family, church groups, volunteer organizations, everyone she interacts with needs to know about her actions and what she's been up to. That's not going to make me look good, I said. I'll be a joke, a loser who can't even satisfy his wife, raising another man's children. You need to make your side of the story public, she said. If you don't, Vanessa will, and it'll make you look worse than just being an unaware loser. Imagine being portrayed as an abusive husband or a father mistreating his kids. People might believe those accusations, and when we go all out against her, she'll retaliate with everything she has. Get ahead of it, and people will be less inclined to believe her counterclaims. Some will still believe them, but there's nothing you can do about that. Michelle prepared a media pack with all the evidence we had on Vanessa's infidelity. It included the private investigator's report, copies of the DNA test confirming I wasn't the biological father of my 2 children, and videos from my house. This included one of James' greeting bill and footage from the bedroom, which I had neither seen nor wanted to. Later that morning, Lorraine emailed me. She had received a DNA sample from Stephanie, which she compared to the test results I had. It confirmed that Bill was indeed the father of both children. I paused at the thought. The children suddenly didn't feel like mine anymore. We added this new information to the pack and prepared everything for distribution. The materials would be sent to Vanessa's parents, my parents, and Vanessa's brother and sister, with whom I was quite close. Digital copies would be sent to her Facebook and LinkedIn contacts, as well as anyone else I could think of. For our immediate family, I arranged for a courier company to deliver the packages at 10 a.m. on Monday, the same time everything was set to be revealed. I just had to get through the weekend, and I had a plan for that too. As an engineer, it took me less than an hour to design and assemble a small device. It had a motor, a timer, and a battery. I could set it so that the motor would activate, causing a strong vibration after a specific time. On Friday night, after the operator had left, I secretly placed the device under Sophie's pillow. It was set to activate at 6 o'clock the next morning, around the time we usually wake up. This would wake Sophie and ensure that our usual weekend morning routine was off the table. The plan worked perfectly. Sophie woke us up by coming into our room, so no closeness happened that morning, just as I had hoped. I couldn't help but smile. Saturday, I stayed busy tackling tasks Vanessa had been pushing me to do for months. When she noticed my productivity, I just mentioned it was about time. That night, when Vanessa tried to initiate closeness, I pretended to be asleep. The next morning, her daughter was once again startled awake by the device. On Sunday, we took the kids to the zoo. As I looked at Vanessa and the children I cared for, I almost broke down but managed to keep it together. On Monday, I told Vanessa I would work from home to speak with the au pair after she left for work. I told the au pair to keep the children home instead of going to the play center, which surprised her as I had never refused her request before. I heard James getting upset about missing the outing shortly after 9. Michelle showed up at the house. I was taken aback, but let her in for the first time ever. I made coffee for her, and we had a scheduled teleconference with Lorraine at 9:30. Gary said, "This is your final chance to back out. I'm not suggesting you should, but if you've had any doubts over the weekend, now's the time to voice them." "No," I replied, "no doubts at all." Then Lorraine said, "It's officially underway." I kept an eye on my email, waiting for the confirmation of service notices. At precisely 10 a.m., the first one arrived, followed by the second about 3 minutes later, and the third 5 minutes after that. Then my phone rang. I expected it to be Vanessa, but it was my mother, Gary. She began, "Hi, Mom," I responded. "What's going on?" she asked. "Did you read the packet I sent you?" I inquired. "Yes, but then you know what I know," I said. "Vanessa has been cheating on me, likely throughout our entire marriage, with her boss. The kids aren't mine. I'm divorcing her." "Gary, can't you?" "No, Mom. I have to go. I have other calls coming in." I ended the call only for my phone to ring again immediately. This time it was Vanessa. "Gary," she said, but I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. "We need to talk," she said, but I still didn't respond. "I'm coming home," she said, then ended the call. "Vanessa is on her way," I informed Michelle. "I'll leave you to it," Michelle said. I wanted to ask her to stay but didn't know how. I just looked at her. "Call me," Michelle said, "when you figure out what's happening." Then she left. Vanessa showed up about 20 minutes later. I heard her car pull into the driveway, but she didn't even bother to park in the garage. I wasn't sure how she would act when she came in. I didn't know if she'd be confrontational or just sneak in. Instead, she came straight into my office and took a seat across from me at the desk. "Gary," she started, "I'm not interested." I cut her off. "But not interested," I repeated. "Don't you even want?" "No," I said, "I don't want to hear anything from you. You lied to me for 9 years. Neither of the kids are mine, yet you convinced me to get a vasectomy while you were still on the pill, just so you could continue your affair with Daddy Bill." Her eyes widened in shock. "So no, Vanessa, I continued. I don't care what you have to say. My lawyer's contact information is in the packet you received when you were served. If you have anything important to discuss, you can talk to her. What about the children? She asked. What children? I responded. I don't have any children, and if it were up to you, I'd never have any. I would ask why you did this to me, but I really don't want to hear another lie. I have no interest in your excuses or justifications. I just want this whole mess to be over, so I can pick up the pieces of my life and move on. I called the office manager into the room. I knew she could hear me since my office door was open, and she was just in the next room. You're fired, I said, effective immediately. Pack your things and get out. Why? She asked. Because you were covering for her, I said, pointing at Vanessa. You knew she was sleeping with her boss. I don't know if you knew the kids were his instead of mine, but you definitely knew what was happening. I have video proof of you talking to Bill about the kids. Get out. Gary, Vanessa interjected, you can't fire her. I'm the one who pays her wages. The office manager shot Vanessa a grateful look. Well, I said, I've already informed the agency that you were involved in an affair and that I won't be taking legal action if they remove you from their roster. So, if Vanessa wants to keep you on personally, not only will she have to pay you, but she'll also need to handle all your tax, vacation, pension, sick leave, and insurance. The office manager's face went pale. Not only was she losing her job, but being kicked off the agency's books made it nearly impossible for her to find another position. Agencies shared information. Now get out, I ordered, and she hurriedly left. Did you have to do that? Vanessa said. She didn't deserve that. You're talking again. I cut her off. I told you I don't want to hear it. What I do want is for you to pack your stuff, take your kids, and get the hell out of my house. This is my house too, she protested. Not according to the paperwork, I said. It's in my name only, until the courts say otherwise. Get the hell out. She flinched at my shout. James walked in. Mommy, he said. Sonia fell down. Vanessa, looking shocked and tearful, stood up and went to tend to her daughter. I shut my office door and stayed inside while she gathered her things. A few minutes later, she returned with Sonia in her arms. Are you going to say goodbye? Don't even say it. I cut her off. She's not my daughter, and he isn't my son. Take them to Daddy Bill, and let him take care of his own kids. They have nothing to do with me. Gary, I get out. I heard the front door slam and Vanessa's car drive away. The moment she was gone, I exhaled deeply and fell apart. I was caught off guard when Michelle walked in and wrapped her arms around me as I cried. She comforted me while I struggled to pull myself together. Losing my marriage, children, and life as I knew it was overwhelming. Michelle took charge, urging me to act quickly. We packed my clothes and important documents, then headed to the office, where I was served with an emergency occupation and restraining order. I was now banned from my own house and could only retrieve belongings with Vanessa's lawyer present. Confused and defeated, I moved into Michelle's spare room. My clothes were now in her wardrobe, and my documents were at the office. For the past week, my routine involved working and staying with Michelle, who kept things strictly professional, despite her supportive hug on Monday. We had a meeting with Vanessa and Bill's company lawyers. We were pursuing a claim for a substantial sum, far exceeding their insurance coverage of $1 million. Their lawyers were all business, while Lorraine, my lawyer, had a satisfied grin on her face. What will it take, asked their lawyer, to settle this matter? Lorraine responded, immediate and permanent dismissal of the senior person involved, with the loss of their pension. Additionally, they must agree to keep Vanessa on the payroll for at least 3 years and pay us $1.5 million. I wasn't paying much attention as the negotiations unfolded, but in the end, they agreed to everything. However, I would receive only about $750,000. At least that would cover a significant portion of my debt to the company pension fund. All payments were to be made after the divorce is finalized, Lorraine clarified, and they agreed. Lorraine stayed with us for the next meeting with Bill and Rye's lawyers. When I left their office, I was $500,000 richer. This sum would allow me to fully pay off the pension fund loan and still have a comfortable amount left, though this would be finalized after the divorce. My final meeting of the day was with Vanessa's attorneys. Vanessa was present with them but avoided making eye contact as I walked in. Michelle and Lorraine accompanied me. Your client's financial disclosures in the divorce petition are absurd, Vanessa's lawyer began. He's a majority shareholder and CEO of a company valued at around $20 million, not to mention the assets in the house, say savings, and 401k. I propose let me interrupt you, Lorraine said, pulling out a stack of papers from her briefcase. The company's finances are irrelevant to this divorce, as stipulated in the prenuptial agreement signed by all parties. My client recently made a substantial investment in the company, using most of his savings, his entire 401k, and taking out a loan against the house. He also borrowed from the company pension fund. One of the partners wanted to sell their shares, and it was crucial, to prevent those shares from falling into the hands of a competitor who has been trying to acquire the business for years. Given that the loan from the pension fund has reduced his salary, he now earns less than your client. I will be requesting a maintenance arrangement from the court to support him while he adjusts. What about the children? Asked Vanessa's lawyer. There is DNA evidence proving those children are not his, Lorraine replied. Vanessa falsified birth records to misrepresent my client as the father with fraudulent intent. Additionally, we are exploring claims for damages due to a serious assault, as she convinced him to undergo a surgical sterilization under false pretenses, believing he was the father. Alternatively, Lorraine continued, your client can sign the divorce petition as it stands, pack her belongings, and vacate the marital home. She will receive half of the joint account, which currently holds $944,315. Vanessa's lawyer reviewed the documents, the prenuptial agreement, and then glanced at Vanessa for the first time. She looked at me. Gary, please, she began. In years, I interrupted. 9 damn years. You lied to me every single day. There's nothing you can say that I want to hear. Vanessa glanced at her lawyer and nodded, then signed the documents. I wasn't around when she moved out. Instead, I received an email from her lawyers notifying me that the restraining order had been lifted and that the house was officially mine. I could move back in whenever I wanted. I thought about it, but decided against it. I put the house up for sale. It didn't cover the full amount owed to the bank, but I made up the difference and settled with them. 2 months later, I was still living in Michelle's spare room. After the divorce, Vanessa moved in with her parents. Despite all the evidence I provided, they sided with her and refused to speak to me. I didn't miss their company. Stephanie, for some unknown reason, hadn't divorced Bill as she had said she would. I had no interest in why and didn't care to find out. Bill had lost his job and pension, leading them to sell their home in the gated community and downsize to a smaller apartment. Despite losing his previous income, Bill found a decent job with his skills and managed to get by. I hadn't seen Vanessa since the lawyer's office and had no desire to. I was at my desk at work when Michelle knocked and entered the room without waiting for a response. Bill Way is dead, Michelle said bluntly. What I responded, shocked. How Stephanie found him with Vanessa again, she explained. She shot him. I leaned back in my chair, unable to suppress a wide grin that spread across my face. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy, I said after a moment. Michelle laughed. Am I terrible for feeling happy about this? I asked her. Not at all, Michelle replied. That scumbag got what he deserved. Oh, and this was just delivered. She placed an official-looking envelope on my desk. I eyed it wearily, knowing what it probably contained. I picked it up and tore it open. That's it, I declared. I'm finally a free man. Finally, Michelle agreed. Then she did something I never would have expected. She kissed me. It wasn't a brief peck or a simple kiss. It was a full, passionate kiss with tongues and all. When she finally pulled away, I slumped back in my chair, breathless and stunned, feeling as rigid as a statue. Michelle giggled at the sight of my clear reaction. For 9 years, she said, I've taken care of you. You're the most incredible man I've ever met. Not once did you ever look at me inappropriately or make advances, and I admired you for that. I've waited 9 years for you. Now that you're free, I know you've always respected me, and that's a form of love too. We make a great team. I know you as well as any wife knows her husband, and if you think about it, you know me in the same way. Give me a chance to show you that not all women are deceitful and untrustworthy, please. I was taken aback. I recalled all the time spent with her before I discovered the infidelity. I thought about how I had defended her fiercely, even to the point of expelling my business partner. At that moment, I realized that I had genuine feelings for Michelle, and that I still did. It seemed inevitable to develop some kind of emotional connection when working so closely with someone for such a long time. While I was married to Vanessa, I never had to confront or evaluate these feelings, but now it was clearly necessary. "Say something," she asked, her face showing concern. It was the first time I had ever seen her appear unsure. "How many?" I inquired. She looked confused. "How many what?" she asked. "Children," I clarified. "How many children should we have?"